Our moderator, Paul Goldberger, and then he's going to take over and run the rest of the show for us. So I'm sure most of you have read his fantastic writing in Vanity Fair, where Paul is a contributing editor. He assumed that position after being the architecture critic at The New Yorker and at The New York Times. He's also the author of many acclaimed books, including most recently, Why Architecture Matters. I think that's a great topic for today. Building Up and Tearing Down, Reflections on the Age of Architecture, and Christo and Jean-Claude. He was formerly the dean of the Parsons School of Design, a division of the New School, and has also taught at the Yale School of Architecture and the Graduate School of Journalism at the University of California, Berkeley. He continues to lecture widely around the country today. For his cultural commentary and criticism, Paul has been the recipient of many awards, including the Pulitzer Prize for Distinguished Criticism in 1984, and the Vincent Scully Prize in 2012, recognizing exemplary practice, scholarship, or criticism in architecture, historic preservation, and urban design. Obviously, we couldn't have found a better person to be our moderator today, so please join me in welcoming Paul Goldberger.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vicki, and thank you all for rising on a beautiful Saturday morning in Williamstown and deciding not to go riding your bikes or running or whatever else people do on a beautiful Saturday morning in Williamstown. Let me first introduce the extraordinary group of people on my left who have put together the project that's our subject. They've been a remarkable team, and one of the things we'll talk about over the next few minutes is their how they have worked together as a team, each with very different responsibilities, but coordinated quite, I think, given the result, smoothly. On my far left, on your right, is Michael Conforti, who I'm sure you all know, the distinguished director of the Clark. I think it is fair to say without whom this project could not have happened. Gary Hilderbrand of Reed Hilderbrand, the landscape designer, is seated beside him. Kulapat Yantrasast, who worked on the interiors and has worked as a colleague for a long time with Tadao Ando, is beside him. Mr. Ando, the senior architect and lead architect and conceiver both of the overall master plan for the Clark and the design of the main new buildings. Yes, thank you. Maddy Burke-Vigeland of Gensler, the international architectural firm that served as executive architect or managing architect, coordinating the entire project, and Annabelle Selldorf, who oversaw the restoration of the original Clark building and the ongoing restoration of the Manton Center, which will be completed shortly. Welcome to all of you. Thank you. I remember a presentation in New York, I think it was actually at the Danielle restaurant, of these very ambitious plans quite a number of years ago, and thinking all this is very impressive indeed, but of course it's never going to happen. Or if it does happen, it will take forever and come out very differently. It didn't take forever, maybe almost, but not quite. But perhaps the most remarkable thing is that it didn't come out differently. It came out pretty much as intended. So we've come at last to this day that I think everybody on this stage, but Michael Conforti most of all, has waited a long time for, when a great art institution has reconceived itself and found a larger architectural expression to encompass a broader mission with what I think, as I said a moment ago, have been minimal compromises, or at least minimal compromises by today's standards. It involved the restoration of one building, the renovation of another, and the construction of several others, the demolition of some, and the reorientation of all of them, as well as the reconceiving of the landscape and the creation of new elements of landscape. So it's very bold in one sense, and yet at the same time, I think it emerged out of the belief that one of the ways you help to make a place stay the same is to allow it to change. I remember G.K. Chesterton, the English writer, made an extraordinary observation that has always stayed with me, that sometimes, in fact, to be a true conservative, to truly conserve something, you actually have to be a radical. You have to be willing to change it, because it's a great myth to believe that you preserve things by leaving them alone. If you leave a white fence post alone, Chesterton said, in a short time, you will have a black fence post. If you really want it to be exactly as it has been, you have to intervene. You have to always, he said, be having a revolution. And so the Clark has had a revolution. And our topic this morning will be to look at that revolution, to think about what it means, and in particular, what role architecture and design and landscape design have in that process. So let me begin, and first let me say to the panel, our format, as you know, is deliberately informal. I will start it off with some questions, but we really want this to be a conversation, not a series of talks. Please feel free to jump in at any point. In fact, you will not be rude if you interrupt each other. Please do. Please say whatever's on your mind, and let's keep this as lively and engaging as possible. And at a certain point, a little later in the morning, we'll open it up and invite all of you to join the conversation as well. I'd like to start out by asking a question that may or may not be directly about architecture, which is to ask each of you if you could just say in a single sentence what you think the fundamental idea of the Clark is. What is, Annabelle, would you like to start? You're right here, okay. I probably should have asked Michael to start, because after all, he's been spending the last 20 years getting paid to think about the answer to that question. So nevertheless, if we were to say, what is the essential idea of this place that distinguishes it from other places, what would it be?
Okay, if I have to start, then I will.
Okay, good.
I believe it's bringing nature and art together in a completely unique way. And through the work of Mr. Ando, leading visitors up to the museum, which is the jewel of the crown, and affording them a moment of respite, of turning around and addressing the simply breathtaking landscape that has been so gorgeously framed by Reed Hilderbrand, is a simply overwhelming idea and a real gift to all of those coming to visit.
I think that was one sentence, yes. Your English teacher might have punctuated it at a couple of points, but we'll let it go for the sake
German.
of
I could have said it all in one word,
okay, yeah.
by the way.
Right, that was one German sentence, exactly.
Well, I'll repeat no, I won't repeat. But I think in addition to what Annabelle said, I think that the Clark is one of openness, and that the idea that anybody can come here, anybody can enjoy, whether it's art or nature or having a cup of coffee. That openness is really unique.
Right, wonderful. Mr. Ando, can you, is it possible to say in just one sentence what the essential idea of the institution is, not necessarily of your design?
設計デザインだけじゃなくてその機関としてそのインスティテューションとしてどういうことですか？
私日本語しかできなくて英語ができないんですが、この英語のできない人に頼んでいただくというふうにびっくりしました。
I speak only Japanese, excuse me, and I don't speak English, but I was quite surprised that I would be asked the questions even though I don't speak the language.
Okay.
もう一つ、やはりこの長い間忍耐強くコンフォルティさんが頑張られたり、クラークの人たち頑張られるのに本当に驚嘆いたしました。
And I was really impressed that it's been a long process, but as the people at Clark, it's of course it's Mr. Conforti taking the lead. It's the team worked so patiently and perseverely. It's really continued and completed the process.
Thank you. Good. Kulapat, can you?
Thank you. I think it took me some years to understand, but I think the Clark, to me, mean the process of trying to create this place that could not be any place else. I think we do that with art, nature, and architecture, and we distill this into this unrecognizable human experience that just touched everyone. And I think even though we were guessing that what we were trying to do, it was a total experience, and I think that's what I feel that's the Clark experience.
Great. Good. Gary.
I like your formulation, Paul, of radical conservation. And for our team, which has been working here, as you said, really for 13 years, and hopefully quite a lot longer, you'll see that we still need work being done over there. The term we've really come to love is stewardship. The Clark represents a kind of model of stewardship, not only about its collections, which of course are the reason for its being, but also of its programs and its land assets. But as Paul has said, conservation isn't merely about saving things. You can't save things if you don't work on them. And this is the great gift of the Clark is that of the potential even for reinvention while being stewards of their great assets. And we're all fortunate to be amidst an institution that sees itself never standing in place.
Thank you. And now, Michael, tell us if we're all right or wrong on these things.
You know, everybody in this room has heard me do the Clark mission. You know, but I was moved this morning as I was on the terrace with Mr. Ando. I mean, and I would say in a far more simple way than I'm prone to do, and you all know how unsimple I can be. It's just a wonderful place to be, and I would that if you pull that apart to the many people who are part of our constituency, this project has actually made it a more wonderful place to be for all the people who participate, who have participated and who will participate in what we are, whether it's the people who come to look at the extraordinary paintings, now deeply enhanced by Annabelle's work, the people who come as scholars, the people who work in our library who will be thrilled by that landscape, and the people who may be more casual cultural tourists who come to experience being in the Berkshires in this special environment. I think the garden, you can come and you can go into the garden. It's open 24 hours. You don't have to go into the institution. It is a public park. There will be skating in the winter. All the people, all the constituents that we've had in the past, that we currently have and will have even more of in the future, are going to be enhanced by what we have at the Clark. And I thank everybody on this panel for your collective contribution in making it so, along with people I see in the audience, Don Clinton, who did our master plan in the late 90s, and Leif Selkrig, who walked us through some difficult moments. There are many people here, you know who you are. I'm not going to cite all of you. You all participated in this rather extraordinary and complex team over a long period of time.
Thank you. If we may, let's talk a little bit more, particularly now, about the architecture. The Clark had felt, for me, for a long time, like a pair of, I'll say, a very distinguished institution located in a pair of not entirely distinguished buildings that were locked in a kind of awkward marriage with each other. And when I first saw the completed project, the extraordinary thing for me was that it had gone from sort of being a bad marriage to being a good family, let's say, actually, which is quite a remarkable feat. That by adding a third superficially different element, in fact, the entire thing became a coherent synthesis, which is quite a remarkable achievement. May I start by asking, was that in fact the intention? Was that part of the larger concept, and how was it conceived? Mr. Ando, could you respond to that? Thank you. Yes. No. Now. Okay. Now you may have as many lines as you wish. That was only to begin. Now, if you wish to speak for an hour, we will listen. It's fine. Okay.
はじめにゴールドバーガーさんが言われたように、面白いプロジェクトを発表されたけども、できないのではないかと言われましたけども、私もそう思いました。
Paul just mentioned that when he first heard of the project, he wasn't sure if it would go ahead, and it was the same feeling I had originally.
そしてまたコンフォルティさんが言われたように、本当にいろいろなところがあるけれどもなんか嬉しくなる。そして静かであるけれどもしっかりと自分の心に残る場所を作れというのも初めから聞かされておりました。
And Mr. Conforti's vision was very clear from the very beginning. His demand to me was that it's a place with many different elements, but it has to be a space where people feel happy and content. And also it is a serene, quiet place, but it has the quality that remains in people's heart for a long, long period of time.
そしてぐるっと見て私は思いましたけども、クラークさんが言われたように自然を都会の中から逃げて美しい自然を残すんだという場所の中でどう作るかと考えました。
So I understand it was Mr. Clark's intention to cite the institution here, precisely because this is in such a beautiful natural setting. He wanted to have a place away from the urban setting and then preserve the value of art. And that's the first thing I thought when I was working on this project.
私はちょうどここへ来た時に皆さん方と何回かお会いしました。
And I met the team several times when I came here.
大体女性多いですよね。
And also I think I see you as well, and I can see it's a majority is actually as the women.
日本はあんまり女性いないんですよ。
But in Japan, as the architectural world is occupied by many men.
そしてもう一つ長生きする100歳まで生きるということをちょっと考えてみたいと思います。
And also I'd like to think that today we live long. Let's say we are going to live till age 100.
やっぱり一つは体力というエネルギーいますね。
So in order to live long, to become a centenarian, we need a sort of physical power.
やっぱりもう一つはやっぱり好奇心だと思うんです。
But the other thing, more important, is curiosity.
映画とか美術館とかいろいろ自然とかこういうものを
You know, you should watch good films, movies, theaters, and art, and also nature.
そして好奇心は自分の体の中に青春がずっと蘇ってくるもんだと思います。
And I think the curiosity is the spring of youth that is inherent within yourself.
そして毎日見てるうちにずいぶんとこう好奇心というエネルギーが100歳まで新しい自分の力を感じて青春を感じてくるもんだとすると、そういう場所をクラークで作りたいと思いました。
And it's for us to become centenarians, we need this curiosity. It's actually the source of youth. It's the spring of youth within ourselves. And I thought that I wanted to make a clock as the place where the curiosity will be coming forward voluntarily.
もう一つはやっぱり歩くということですね。
Another thing is to walk. That's important for longevity.
私いつも1万歩歩くんです。
Every day I walk 10,000 steps.
そしたら今度の場所からコンザベーションセンターまでぐるぐる歩いてるとすぐ1万歩行くじゃないですか。
And if you start from the entrance of the institution and walk up the hill to the conservation center and make the trip several times, it's easy for you to reach 10,000.
そしたらタヌキが出てきたりキツネが出てきたり
And you will see raccoons, maybe a fox, maybe rabbit.
そして突然こう現代美術が出てくる。
And then suddenly, out of this pastoral setting, you will see a very modern, contemporary building.
そして私が考えたのは100歳まで行きたかったらクラークで近所でウィリアムスターブンで過ごせばいいんじゃないかと思いました。
So I think it's, one secret will be for long living, healthy senior citizens is to come here often as possible and then just, spend time here at Clark.
それがマークできたかどうか皆さん方も見に行かれるときは両方行っていただきたい。コンザベーションセンターもこっちもあっちも。それもああいうカートで乗らずに歩いて。
So, whether or not I succeeded in my vision is up to you. And please make sure when you come to Clark, not only to visit the building, the project, but also walk up to the conservation center without that golf cart.
I think this is one more. Okay.
今ゴールドバーガーさんがちょっとどうかなという一番古い建物ありますね。
Hi. And that original building that Mr. Goldberger just touched on very lightly.
だけどあれをおじいさんだと思って隣をお父さんだと思って今度は孫だと思ってこう連続して水で囲われるとこう家族が語り合っているような建築。
And as he mentioned, my vision was to position that original building as the grandfather. And the building next to it, that's the father. And then my new building is actually as a new grandchild. And these three generations are now tied with that central water feature. So it's a family.
で私は
As in many families, the new grandchild brings together the previous warring generations, right? Is that?
でもう一つは石があるじゃないですか。石
And another thing is that the stone wall.
Yes.
で私初めて石使った。
And this is the first time I ever used a stone in my work.
あるものを生かす。
And it's precisely because it's been used already on the site.
そしてこの丘があるじゃないですか。
And we also have that hill mountain.
石の壁を建てることによってもっと丘が美しく見えるように。
And that stone wall is there precisely because it will enhance and strengthen the existence of that hill right there.
で皆さん方も同じように孫ができたらおじいさん元気になるじゃないですか。
And when you have your first grandchild, don't you get energized?
だから私はそういう建物を作りたい。
So, that's the vision I had. I wanted to get that architecture to play like that.
I think, good, thank you. I think while I don't want to push this metaphor too much farther, I think we've already pressured it as much as it can take, this family. But nevertheless, one of the other things that I think is impressive is that the degree of deference that is shown to the original building from South Street in the front, that it is still allowed to have sort of pride of place. When you drive by, you don't really immediately see that it has been superseded. There is a very gracious gesture toward it. Only when you go in do you see that all these other things are there. And I presume that that is a very intentional decision. Is that correct?
確かに今の古い建物、難しい問題いっぱいあると思いますが、インテリアを見ていただいたら分かりますが、非常にレベル高いと思っています。
And from outside, it is, I'm afraid to say that it's true that it has many issues. But the original building, once you are inside, I think it's the quality of the interior space is high.
Yes.
コンホリティさんの部屋がありますが、それはもう最高でやっぱり館長一番いい部屋座っとんなと思ってます。
And have you ever been to Mr. Conforti's office? And being the director, of course, he has the best space in the building.
でやっぱり水があることによって皆がお互いにこう響き合えるんではないかと思ってます。
And the objective was to create a synergy among these buildings by having that water feature.
もう一つ今回は良かったのはクラパットさん、ゲリーさん、そして彼女ゲンスラー、みんなでお互いに自分の意見を言い合いながら、もちろんぶつかっていますが、ぶつかりながらでもお互いにいい理想を求めて走ったのがうまく出来上がったんではないかと思っています。
And one more thing, let me just say one more thing, is that of course we worked as a team, and of course we butted our heads time to time. It's Gary, Annabella, and it's Maddy and Michael and so forth. But it's because we had these moments of serious discussion, I think we succeeded.
もう一つ、コンホリティさんはもう3日にあげずメールが来ます。
And Michael sent me emails. It's every 3 days.
でうち矢野さんというのはやってましたけども、もうメールはもう見るなと。
And we have Yano-san. He is the contact on our from our side to Clark. And I told him, don't look at his emails.
もう毎日来んねやからこう。
Because I said every 3 days, but actually it came every day.
What? I said, Mr. Ando, what will you do with all your free time now that this project is finished? I mean, we were. Let's talk a little bit more about the original building, if we could. Annabelle, can you address some of the challenges of dealing with it? It's a beautiful but problematic building in many ways, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. How did you address it?
Well, I take very much to what you said earlier, is that in order to conserve, you have to radically intervene. In the early days, when Michael talked to us about the building, he said, you don't want to do this building. Why would you want to do this building? You can't do anything here. But I think we changed everything in such a way that you have to discover it. And I really think that it took taking inventory to begin with of what the moments of beauty were. Not only do you have an incredibly beautiful collection that is worth cherishing, but affording people to take time and really look at the art rather than just running around the building in the way in which you were doing it before was essentially the objective. And unlike the beautiful work of Mr. Ando, that relies very much on a major master plan intervention, the work here at the 55 building, I think, was about taking stock of absolutely every surface, every proportion, every bit of lighting, every opportunity to look at art, and bringing this all together and making it a tranquil and intelligent kind of coherent whole. And as such, you don't become a critic, but you become, I don't know, I think you sort of channel.
Yeah, it seemed to me as if you have made the building a sort of better version of what it was, in a way.
I hope so.
Right. I mean, that seemed to be the aspiration, was to sort of
Yes,
allow it to be what it wanted to be in a better
right.
way. Yeah.
I think it's a completely different building. It's a much, if it were a person, it would be a much more open, much friendlier, much more interested kind
Right.
of a family member, if we can stick to that.
I think we may have to let that metaphor
Okay,
rest a little bit now. But now, Maddy, you were coordinating very, very different parts of the project. Can you talk a little bit about that particular challenge? Because you were working with Annabelle doing restoration and change. You were working with the Ando office and with all the other parts of the project, as well as with more technical things. How unusual was this challenge? Here.
Well, first and foremost, it was highly unusual opportunity. But I think what ultimately what we did on the part of our team was we set up different teams, but still with an overall leadership structure to the Clark. And part of our job, really, in working with Mr. Ando and working with Annabelle and working with Gary and Olive Reed Hilderbrand, was to kind of constantly remind the Clark of the reason that they hired this team, because invariably across the course of the project, there were times when the design would be challenged for one reason or another. And so I think we really took it on as our job to be the one to say, maybe we could do it this way and still maintain the design intent. And so I think in that way, weaving together the various designers became our challenge, but also our privilege.
Oh, and clearly it required somebody who could speak all these different languages, literally and figuratively, both. I mean,
Yeah, interestingly about the language, and Mr. Ando and Yano may not recall this, but when we were first hired, of course there was the idea that we were in New York, the design team was in New York, and Mr. Ando and his team were in Japan. And so the suggestion was made to have a conference call. And so we set up the conference call at a time that we felt was convenient, and in fact the conference call was quite a disaster. From a language point of view, from the idea of just having a conference call, didn't quite go over. So at the time...
It also had to be 3 a.m. for somebody, I would think, actually, too.
So at the time, the technology was actually faxing. And so we decided that we would start faxing back and forth. And so...
It does show you how long this project, the arc of this project, doesn't it? Yeah.
We continued, actually, up until yesterday. We've been emailing, or when Yano got on the plane, emailing back and forth about various details. And the same, in a way, with Annabelle's team, because although we're both in New York, you can't always be in the same place at the same time. So the language of drawing, similarly with Reed Hilderbrand in Cambridge. So the drawing thing became the communication tool.
Ah, that's how, so you actually were literally exchanging actually images and drawing sketches and so forth back and forth.
Exactly.
Yep. But now you each speak very different drawing languages as well as languages. Was that an issue for anybody? I mean, the styles of drawing are different.
Maybe I can start.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
other
Why
people
I'd
can
love to
chime
hear
in.
anybody
Because
respond to that.
ultimately, well, Reed Hilderbrand produced their own final drawings, but Gensler produced the final drawings for Mr. Ando and Selldorf. So what we did was we got on board early drawing, the conventional drawings, and this brought in actually all of the consultants who are in the more traditional form. So translating the sketches back and forth,
Right.
that became part of the real dialogue of the project.
Great. Yeah.
いや、あそこにピューリッツさんおられますよ。
Mrs. Pulitzer is sitting there. Thank you very much.
ピューリッツさんのうち向こうに矢野さんって言いますよ。
And we have, my people, I mean, it's Mr. Yano from my office is there in the back.
矢野さんがですね、ファックスとメールのちょっとクレイジーなんです。毎日もうメールとファックス送ってないと頭おかしくなる。
I have to tell you, Mr. Yano, he's a crazy guy. And he's a madman of emails and faxes.
毎日ファックス。
And so every day, every moment, he is on
彼
them.
女も大変やったと思います。
And I'm, sorry, Maddy, you must have been overwhelmed.
もう私横で見とっても、あともうこれもらう方が大変やろなと思います。
Because I watch him every day, what he's doing, and I really sympathize with those who have to receive his communication.
そしてコンフォルティさんはやんや言うてくる。
And on the other hand, it's Michael, Mr. Conforti, just, bombarded us as well.
で、私が良かったのは英語ができなかったよ。
As the beauty of my case is I don't speak the language.
まあ非常に平穏に今まで14年間やりました。
So, that's why I could manage it for the last 14 years. I didn't, I had always a quiet time.
ぜひ入り口から入って中に庭がありますから庭にずーっと佇んでいただくと静かにそれが感じられるのではないかと。
And please make sure that you go into the building and go out onto the terrace and just, sit there and enjoy the moment of respite.
Great. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Gary, that's a perfect segue into a little bit more discussion of landscape. Very often, landscape architects are brought in late in the process to their distress, I guess, to sort of decorate like icing on a cake. You've been here really from the beginning. Can you talk about the integral role of landscape in this project and how you and the particulars of this expression here?
Yes, with great pleasure. Thank you. The first thing to say is that the Clark really knew what it was doing. And when the Clark engaged Mr. Ando and his team and immediately decided to include a landscape architect, and then also the Gensler team, and then Annabelle's team, and the civil engineer who are here in Williamstown, they implemented something that's an unusual kind of structure in a project like this, which is that we all knew that we were collaborators at the table, but we were all engaged separately by the Clark. And that meant that we had a collective voice. We had to have a shared voice. You really have to have, in a way, a kind of one-stop shop. You have to deliver something that has all the coordination and sophistication of all of the trades. It has to be able to be built and so on. Equally, we had our own line of communication with the Clark. And that is unusual. It meant that if things didn't seem right, you could pick up the phone and you could be a direct consultant to this client. And so from the outset, I think that team structure was really a brilliant move, and I think it served the Clark well, and it certainly served each of the disciplines well. The second thing to say is that inside of our team at Reed Hilderbrand, and I'm proud to say that many of the team members are here in the room today, and they really deserve our great thanks. Inside our team, we made a kind of collective formulation. We set out to say that if our project would succeed if we could make the Clark even more like the Clark than the Clark is itself. So, you know, in a way, that's a kind of twist of words. Even more like the Clark than the Clark itself. What does that mean? You used to go in the back. Those of you who live in Williamstown know Stone Hill, the Stone Hill Meadow, and you know that it's an artifact of a great agrarian past, and because we live now in a wooded landscape, it has achieved just enormous value. And Michael described this as, you know, practically a public park. We think of it as a commons. Stone Hill Meadow is a kind of commons for Williamstown, for people who come here to see art, and really for all of the northern Berkshires. And in some ways, it's a commons for the nation. You went in the back, then you went through a tube, and finally into the side of the museum. Without going into too much detail about how we achieved this, it seems today that when you go there, the landscape, which you know is embodied in many of the paintings of Whistler and Innes and Fragonard and Degas and Corot, so many great works of landscape in that museum, absolutely resonate with the fact that when you walk down the path and through a little notch in a building, the Clark seems to be about landscape. That transformation from scooting round the back and not even seeing it and thinking of the ditch just beyond the parking lot as a barrier, maybe you would see the cows. Now, you just won't even go to the Clark without that incredible panorama. And so, you know, that meant, Paul, picking almost everything up and gently putting it back. We changed all of the paths, all of the roads, and did so in a way that hopefully respects the ecological functioning of the landscape. That's what it is. It'll be functioning long after we're all gone. But to do it in a way that enhanced that functioning and also made the Clark more like the Clark is that we normally think of.
It seems to me as if now, you're right, that I mean, as one entered before, that really seemed to be mainly a way of accommodating to parking and cars. Now it really unfolds in an almost cinematic way as you walk through. How conscious was that unfolding? How much of that was you? How much was Ando's contribution? How much was the client itself, the institution? The notion of a kind of cinematic passage through. Can you speak to that for a sec?
Yeah. There are a lot of moving parts to that, and perhaps among the first is the idea that the Clark had already well understood that there was only one place you could put a building as large as the visitor center and galleries and loading dock and registrar and all of those things had to be. A fairly large building, though, as you know, it looks as if it's a modest one-story building. That meant that 65% of that building had to be below grade. It was also a kind of vision of the Clark that we knew we should probably approach that from the north because you simply couldn't approach it from the south. That meant purchasing property and, you know, really doing things that are on the extraordinary end of, you know, what an institution does to conserve its land. It actually made the land holdings larger. And so then we were able to conceive of a drive that gives you the greater landscape before you ever arrive. You have a great view of the museum. Its front, you know, holds this honorific place. And you move around in what feels like a rural place. You see Bee Hill and all of that. Then you see Stonehill Meadow. This is before you've ever arrived at the museum. And so we could take credit for, you know, the technical aspects of that. I think that sequence, Paul, was in everyone's mind almost from the start, almost when we had the promise of being able to go around the wall pond.
Yes.
At that point, it seemed as if things could really lock into place, and I love the idea that you think of it as being cinematic, and then there's a moment when, you know, the movie stops and the real landscape is there right in front of you.
Great, good, wonderful. Kulapat, can you talk for a moment about some of the interiors issues here and some of the ones that you faced in your role and what made it distinctive here?
Well, thank you. I'd like to go back to your
Sure.
thoughts about material for a second.
Sure.
Which is, you know, the DNA of the family metaphor that we talked. One of the first meetings that Michael came to Osaka, he brought with him two big pieces of boulders. One is pink and one is white. And he put it on the table that we have a meeting. And he said the design had to incorporate this DNA.
Right.
These are the DNA of the clock, which is the granite and the marble. And I think that knowing that Ms. Rando designed with concrete,
Right.
so I think it's a gentle challenge.
That did not. I guess we should all consider ourselves lucky that the meeting didn't end at that point, right? It's sort of,
It was, in his way, almost playing chess.
Yes.
Right? This is my move. So I'm putting these rocks on the table, and let's see how you... So the materials discussion has always been in the DNA of the building.
yes.
And like what you say, I think hopefully we have achieved a great balance of symphony of materials
Yes.
from the inside and outside. It's a very difficult project to define what's inside and what's outside because of the indoor-outdoor exposure and how the architecture really invite and involve the outside within the building and vice
Sure.
versa. And because of that, I think what we're trying to do is really to bring a sense of clarity of materials into the building. You see the stone walls running through the building
Yes.
in a way that it clarifies the experience and it clarifies the places within the clock that we are trying to achieve. And within that, you know, I think based on the discussion that we have with Michael and his team, is a sense of something that's quite sophisticated, but still quite rural. Something that can only be had in Williamstown. Something that's not trying to be New York City, not trying to be Boston, something that's perfect right here. And we look a lot at Shaker, obviously. At the same time, it has to be something of today. It's something that has a simplicity and efficiency of the Shaker thinking, but done in 2014. And because of that, we use a lot of wood on the inside. You can see on the floor, on the wall, those are white oaks. And those are meant to, you know, not only in the summer, but in the winter, when people come back, there's a sense of warm and interiorized that the material can provide. So that's kind of fall into the indoor-outdoor aspect of the building.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very important, I appreciate you raising that, because I think one of the things that also struck me is how comfortably the red granite, which connects to, as you say, the DNA of the Clark, works with the characteristic Ando concrete. I mean, they cohabit very well together, it seems to me. The building feels to me no less Ando-esque for the presence of that, I think. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think that for Mr. Ando, if I could speak for him, in the sense that what he mentioned as he uses stone for the first time.
Yes.
And in a way that very confident, that allowed the material to be what it is, allow it to connect with the old buildings as well as the landscape around. But within that, concrete, which is the clarity of the material to he always use and enjoy, really have a wonderful relationship. And then back to the glass, which is, you know, even though its transparency is still quite visible. So that it become a palette that I think he portrays as the image of the place.
Yeah, and in fact, it is it is very much of the Clark, but it is also, even though it is a new material for Mr. Ando's oeuvre, it feels no less Ando-esque somehow. I mean, it does somehow. I guess it is. On the other hand, you know, it's not as though it were shingles. I mean, it is sort of. There is something naturally about red granite that is certainly more compatible with concrete than some materials might be. Michael, can you talk for a moment, if we can shift a little bit? Gary raised the critical point of the unusual organization of this project. Every large project has multiple professionals involved, but in this particular case, as Gary pointed out, they all contracted directly with the Clark. They were not all working for Gensler, or not all working for Ando, or for Annabelle Selldorf, or what have you. Everybody. So that put an unusual burden on you, I would think, to be the coordinating party here.
I think the burden was on the team. If they didn't have an audience in front of them, they would tell you I was the client from hell. But you know, how do we say it? It wasn't part of the plan. Gary actually raised this in Maddy a few months ago. I didn't know it could be done any differently.
Well, this is another case of innocence being empowering. Is that it?
You know, this project began so long ago, and there were so many twists and turns, and so many people in this community know many of the twists and turns that relate to approval processes. And we went through a couple of financial crises. We raised a lot of money from a lot of wonderful and dear people who will be with us forever. The Clark is a much stronger organization now, but I'm sorry I have to go back to sort of the simple ideas, as opposed to the complexity of how you dealt with it on a daily basis. And I didn't send emails every day, by the way. I would have liked to have, but I didn't think that they were ever going to get answered, so there's no point. But you know, the reality is, and I was with Mr. Ando today in the plaza, and I may start to cry, because I think, you know, I remember that moment in Nathaniel Kahn's movie when he was in Dhaka, talking about his father's contribution to that state.
Yes.
And the man who had been through 21 years of the building of the parliamentary buildings in Dhaka began to cry. I think all of us who care about architecture will all remember that moment in documentary filmmaking. And I had to think about that with Mr. Ando, as difficult as as all the years and all the conflicts and all the difficult client relationships. The bottom line is, it looks like it's always been there. And Mr. Ando, working with this team, gave us a wonderful place to be. I mean, it's the simplicity of that moment, taking the oddness of what we have been and making it all seem logical. You know, it starts with the weirdness of having a great college with great traditions for art in this oddly placed location in the Berkshires, but still managing to be a kind of number one within its class, sending out graduates in the arts because of the great undergraduate program, graduate program, and indeed the Clark and the Williams College Museum and the rest. And we, as you say, had these funny buildings, good collection, but these funny buildings, and this great landscape. And, you know, we sort of had to come up to it. We had to change. We had to reach the level of which we almost were programmatically, but needed to be experientially. And I think I have to thank everybody on this team, and this is all I'm going to say. No more on the conflicts, the granite and all that. for just working together patiently under the difficult conditions that we presented. Indeed, the opportunities, but the difficult conditions to make, as you walk through, an utterly simple, logical experience, appropriate for the Berkshires. I'll end with one mildly amusing story, since I'm almost in tears. Tom Krenzi's not here today. He might be here this evening. Came over the other day, as usual, with a kind of entourage of Lauren Hutton and Francesco Clementi, and he's a big promoter of this building, and he comes all the time. He lives on my street, as you know, and he was involved with Bilbao, as needless to say, going to work with Frank Gehry to build something very special for that community, and famous. I said, "This is another Bilbao." I said, "No, this is the Berkshire Bilbao." And the Berkshire Bilbao is a Bilbao that is built on the reality that poets and writers came here in the middle of the 19th century to repose. This was the site of transcendental philosophy that attracted a lot of rich people in the late 19th century. Indeed, a college began here, and people continue to come to these extraordinary cultural institutions that have evolved here. There's no place in the world quite like the Berkshires, with nationally and internationally recognized summer venues, and not summer stock, but serious summer venues, theaters and music and the rest. This is a very extraordinary place, and now we have another site here in this Berkshires, here in this community, and here in this college, and the Clark is now embracing its landscape and presenting to its many visitors its best possible, the best of all possibilities of experience. And I have to say, as Nathaniel Kahn heard, thank you to all of you for having made a special site for us. So thank you to everybody in this room.
Thank you. I think that's actually a wonderful moment to open this conversation up, to invite some of you with questions to join in. If there are some, yes, sir. Let's start here.
Does the planning process involve planning for further expansion?
Aha. To what extent, I'll repeat the questions. To what extent did the planning process involve planning for further
Let me
expansions?
just answer. Somebody asked that earlier today, and Don Clinton, who's over here, created with Cooper Robertson a master plan for the Institute that was approved by the trustees in 2001, and it does assume growth over the course of many decades beyond us. I'm sure that master planning might be changed by future generations, but there is a plan for the evolution of the campus, with the assumption that where we are now will not change, but where we might be along the campus, along Stone Hill and other places, might be where we grow. So that's our current assumption, but generations can have a different point of view, later generations.
However, you are not, this is not a way of saying Mr. Ando should expect more emails next week about the next phase. Is that the
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. Thank you. Some others. Yes, back there.
I know Annabelle mentioned the art, and I know the focus is on the architecture and the beauty of the landscape. But can someone talk a little bit more about the wonderful collection and how you feel this expansion has enhanced that, and who is talking about that? Who's in charge?
Annabelle, you start, and I can add.
Yeah.
Yes, I think I sort of early on said that probably all of us on the team always thought that the permanent collection is, in a way, the jewel of the crown. And looking at art was very central to certainly me and my team Lisa Green is here, who started at the Clark and now works with me, thankfully. For us, that was always the conversation, and Michael and the curators were incredibly generous, teaching us on what the things were that they expected from a renovated building. And by extension, we went on tours. We went to look at other installations. Of course, we were frequently looking at Mr. Ando's work in other places. And yes, the very simple reality is that art is the center of it all, and the relationship of some of the wonderful work that you see in the building back to the landscape, and sort of creating that relationship. That's what we were after.
Let me just say, it's hard to describe without seeing it, but once you're inside, you'll know. And I think one of the points of the building, which is a kind of an odd point, is that, but you've said it, you experience it by walking through. You don't actually see it anywhere. And it's all pointed to the White Building. This is one of the extraordinary things Mr. Ando did to make the Beluski building look more important than it is, and to provide more emphasis on the White Building. So all of the building, all of the entrances and circulation all relate to that White Building. And what Annabelle has done in giving us, I always use this term, a kind of gravitas. I don't know how else to say it. Everyone loved the Clark. It was a little bit funky. It wasn't the greatest neoclassical architecture. But she has taken that, taken out loading docks, offices, added galleries, changed circulation, fought with us over paint colors. We gave in and we were wrong, and we're so happy we did. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And you will see a spectacular environment for our collection. It's one of the greatest things in this addition and renovation project, and we can't talk about it until you see it.
You can't tell me any client who admits he's wrong is a difficult client. I mean, that's pretty...
Michael was not difficult.
Could I just add to that a little bit? In addition to the permanent collection, a lot of time was spent on the visitor experience for the special exhibitions in the new building, and how people would transverse that building and view that either before or after the permanent collection. And the building is, the program is set up in such a way with very flexible spaces. So when you go and see the building, if you see it tonight, the idea that there's an exhibition there, that space is also a very flexible gallery that can be converted. You may not see it, may not be so apparent, but that can be converted to conference space, but then you can still transverse and go and proceed downstairs to the temporary exhibition galleries down there. So art absolutely was the focus of the experience, in addition to the landscape, of course.
One thing we didn't touch on, and then we'll come back to questions in a sec. Annabelle, can you just very quickly tell us something about what's being planned for the Beluski building, the Manton building?
Yes, many of you will, of course, remember the central space that for so many years has become was the entrance to the museum. It started out as an art space, and perhaps you remember that, but in the current configuration with all of the new buildings and the renovated 55 building, we all felt that making it the heart of a research center was the really important thing. So the big atrium that is suffused by wonderful daylight will effectively become a reading room, and a reading room that welcomes everybody, welcomes the visitors to the museum, welcomes the people who tour the campus, but importantly also welcomes those who work in the building, who do research, and the students of Williams.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Ando, I fell in love with your architecture when I visited museums you designed on Naoshima Island in Japan, which is a strikingly beautiful rural setting, like this setting, where you have beautifully integrated the art and the building and the outside together, and also have a lot of rooms that just house a single piece of art where the light is coming in
直島とウィリアムさん、クラークと別ですから。
Well, I'm afraid that the settings are very different between Naoshima and Clark.
クラークでは今古い建物と新しい建物の間に池があります。そして長い時間の流れがそこに座ると感じる。水のテーブルの上に感じると。今度は自分の存在を自分で感じると。自分が生きているということをしっかり感じる場所にしたい。
So I approached it differently because it's here you have this old building and it's a new building and it's the continuity has to be apparent and also there is this water feature and my intent was to have a space where you feel the moment of your life. It's contemplation of the fact that you are alive by being there.
現代芸術美術もルノワールもモネも一緒ですけども、やっぱり見た人がやっぱり淡々とじーっと見ているうちに自分の存在を感じていくもんだと思うんですね。
I think it's the same for every art. It's either it is a contemporary or Renoir or Monet. It's just by sitting there and it's seeing it in person and just take in your time, and then you feel that it's actually that art piece would contrast to the fact that you are alive at that moment in front of that art piece.
直島にジェームス・タレンの部屋があるんです。真っ暗です。
Hi, and you probably visited James Turrell's building.
で、そこを10分経って出てくると、美術わからないような人も感動してます。
And it's completely dark, as you know, for 10 minutes. And that's even it's somebody who doesn't really know anything about art would be moved by that experience.
この人芸術わかんのかなと思ったら違うんです。自分が10分間我慢したことに感動してるんです。
And those people who are moved by the experience, it's they don't understand the art. They are moved by the fact that they persevered for 10 minutes without leaving the space.
でやっぱり自分なんです。自分。
So I think it's it's after all the bottom line is we ourselves.
でクラークの場合は自分をこうしっかりと存在を示しながら100歳まで生きると頑張ると。
So I think it's Williamstown, it's Clark is where you really become conscious and it's keenly aware of your own existence and makes sure that you would live to 100.
I have one question for Tadao Ando. It sounds as if you resisted the red granite at the beginning, just from some of the comments. Today, now that you see the red granite walls, would you replace them with white concrete?
「人生でこううまくいったり曲がったりうまくいかなかったり戻ったりするじゃないですか。
And it's a journey called life is not straight. It goes around, it goes back, it turns around.
材料を選ぶときもそうなんです。こっち選ぶかこっち選ぶかがこう。
And it's the selection of materials is the same thing. You would think, well, maybe this is good, that is good, or this is not good.
で、あそこで立ってて、石の壁を使おうかなと頭もう真っ暗になりましたよ。
When I was really undecided and I was just thinking really hard whether to use a stone or not for that wall, I had a blackout.
どうしようかなと。
It was a really difficult question.
そして何回も見てるうちにやっぱり過去は大事だと思いました。
I looked at it, thought about it, and then finally I felt that the past has to be respected.
で今 私今日も朝も行ってきました。昨日も行ってきました。石でよかったと思ってます。
And I saw it this morning. Actually, I saw it last evening as well, and during the day, of course. And and now I'm very happy that I chose that. I chose the stone.
Michael has been waiting 10 years to hear that. Yes. Yeah.
Can I tell you a story? Because Eric Lee is here from the Kimball, there's an interesting story. I think it probably was derided, but it is very interesting to think about our two institutions. I'm on a board of another museum in Fort Worth, the Amon Carter Museum, and I often go down to Fort Worth, love the city. And it was very funny that when they were planning, and Eric knows this story, when they were planning the Kimball in the late 50s, they put to the zoning board in Fort Worth a model of the Clark, the 55 building, the marble building. To say, this is what our museum is going to be like. It's not like the Metropolitan Museum. It's not like the Art Institute of Chicago. It's going to be a nice, small little building. And of course, that's what they embraced, probably a conservative approval boards in Fort Worth in the late 1950s. And then they chose Lucan, and they built one of the great museums in the country. As we then, at the same time, were planning our expansion and picked Belusky, and we did that because the head of the Clark board was from Boston, and he had been dean of MIT. I think there are many brutalist buildings that one can like. I think. And I will say one thing, it never, to answer your question finally, it never got critical acclaim. It has functioned very well. And ultimately buildings are about program, and we could not be the institution that we are now without that building. And there are great spaces in it, beautiful auditorium, much more beautiful than here, and wonderful library spaces and the rest. So I often think about the evolution of the Kimball, especially this year with the marvelous addition that they've done, and the evolution of the Clark, and how did we miss out when they were planning Kahn and we did Belusky? That's the way it just happens. But I have to say that, and I think it's been said already, but we have corrected that. And one of the great parts of this project is that Belusky building has never looked better, and it was obviously one of my reasons for bringing that granite to Japan. If we could surround it somehow, and it wasn't my idea to do the seven wall. I just had the piece of stone. The brilliance comes in the great seven wall that actually surrounds the building and develops a sense of campus and place for that building, and we were. I think it now makes sense. I can, yeah.
Had you ever considered not preserving the building once this project was in place?
No. The building functions very well. And one of the great places, actually, in our new campus will be the so-called penthouse at the top floor of the Manton Research Center, now called, to look out on our campus. Now, it's going to be one of the great places on our campus. It's still it'll be the largest, the public reading room that Annabelle is redoing will be the largest single space in our campus. So it remains a very important part of what we are, and the symbol of the research side of our dual mission of being both an art museum and center for research and higher education. And I think it will always be there, but now it is framed appropriately, and I think we've said a lot about that.
Yeah.
And thank you, Paul, for your comments, well expressed.
Thank you. But I do think your point raises an interesting, almost paradox, really, which is that we're at a moment when a lot of brutalist architecture is actually achieving renewed respect, and there are several preservation battles over brutalist architecture, in which I have to admit I've been on the preservation side. So it is somewhat paradoxical that it's been the whipping boy here, where within the larger architectural culture, there is gradually increasing sympathy for it. But I think a lot of that comes from the fact that this was an exceptional mismatch, perhaps. You know, there was a sort of, there was something sort of exceedingly tone deaf about the creation of that building in a way that there was not, say, about some of Paul Rudolph's work of the same time, say, where it was not shifting the DNA of a particular institution in the way that this one did. Anyway, let's go on. Yes, sir.
Ando-san, you shared with us the secret for us to achieve the ripe old age of 100 through exercise. Would you give us your nutritional program we all can hope to reach that age if we exercise?
前に私日本でですけども、サムエル・ウルマンの青春の歌というのをもらいました。
When I was young, in Japan, I was given the poem by Sam Ullman called Youth.
青春というやつです。
And it's called Youth.
青春というのは20代、30代だけではない。
And it says that youth is not a time of life.
70代でも80代でも青春はいける。
So it doesn't matter. You don't have to be a teen or in 20s or 30s. You can be young even if you are in 60s, 70s, or 80s.
しかし理想を失った時に人間は老いる。
But when you lose your ideals or hope, you will grow old.
まあピルリザさんとも時々話しますが、ピルリザさんはいつも理想を持っておられるからいつまでも行くんじゃないですか。
And this is something that I often talk with Mrs. Pulitzer, and she always has this high ideals and vision. So I'm sure, Mrs. Pulitzer, you'll go forever.
そして私はやっぱり青春、それぞれの理想が違う。いい家族を作るとか、いい美術を見るとか、いろいろあるじゃないですか。
And of course, everybody has different dreams, different visions for their own lives. One is that just to have a happy family. Maybe create a great museum.
で、私はここにクラークのたくさんの人たちに守られて作らせていただきました。
And thank you very much. This project was completed thanks to your support, everybody in this room.
そして大変理想の高いコンフォルティさんに引っ張られて。
And of course, there's a great vision of Mr. Michael Conforti.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much.
Wendy, yeah.
At least once or twice a year, so I would say 21 times, or I'm not sure. That's a lot of work, for sure.
Good. Okay. Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Paula. That is, those, I should identify, those are words from Paula Lunder, who, with Peter Lunder, have been great contributors to many institutions. You should all get to the Alfred Lunder Pavilion at Colby College, But today we will be dedicating Stonehill Center, and it will be in the future it will be called the Lunder Center at Stonehill. So thank you for your belief in the Clark.
I think we have time for one or two more if they're relatively quick. Yes.
Much has already been made of the site specificity of the project in terms of materials that were chosen in relationship to landscape, but Kulapat mentioned the shakers, and that made me wonder about the relationship that the project has to the culture of the Northeast, and particularly to the culture of Massachusetts. What makes this a particularly Northeastern project that is specific to the landscape?
For those who might not have heard it, what makes this a project specific to the culture of the Northeast and in particular to Williamstown? Who would like to respond first to that? Any of you can.
I can maybe start on that. I think we think a lot about that in the sense of, I think the similarity of, let's say, Japanese craft and shaker. We all have a love for it, and the sense of simplicity and economy of how you can achieve more with less, right? I think that's something that, in a way, might ring true also for the New England way of thinking. Of a good design is a design that can deliver on multiple levels. And so because of that, based on the Japanese thinking already that the materials has to be processed to the maximal use. So within the building, from the outside, as you can mention, with the stone and the use of the stone, which we in a way try to harmonize and really create a sense of place within the Clark, bring in the landscape, which is truly New England in the way that Gary mentioned, and how the architecture frame and relate to it in a meaningful way, which you see a lot also in Japanese garden, of how the architecture frame and defined the sense of place of nature. And within the interior aspect of that, when we were looking at the use of wood, we looked very much at the craftsmanship and even the fabric that you can see in the building of what are the colors and what are the way that the joineries of wood and how things get together. Because in a cold climate, when you sit in a room looking at, your cabinetry, you actually learn a lot by looking at a lot of the things. So we like that feeling that, in the summer, of course, you can go out and enjoy the place and things like that, and everyone will enjoy the total experience. But in the winter, if you come back here, you start to discover all these craft and details that is in this little wood joinery of the floors, of the cabinetry, of the fabric that we have on the rugs, on the chairs. And those are the things that I think is a delight that architecture keep on giving. So I hope that I answer a little bit of that, but I think the sense of place has always been on our minds collectively.
I'd like to add something as well to this. For a long time, the Northeast was where the major concentration of U.S. population existed. And that meant that we lived at that time in the 17th and 18th and early 19th and mid-19th centuries in an agrarian landscape. This place was known for it. And one of the things that came out of that culture is the idea of the common. That is really a Northeast contribution in some ways to world culture. The idea of a common land. Boston Common maybe is the great paradigm for that. You think about the Stonehill Meadow as the vestige of that kind of common grazing land. And so much of the idea of turning the Clark back to its landscape and giving it forth really for a very large community, really for a worldwide community. I think that is something that recognizes that we live in a global culture, but we do so by valorizing and maybe really privileging those things that are our own assets, that display our traditions, and that really deliver the qualities of what this region is like.
One might almost, I think that's beautifully said. One might almost say that you know, the Clark has gone from, the original Clark was kind of a temple on a hill, which in fact bears very little relationship to the traditions and culture of the Northeast. And to then make the Commons and a New England village a model is in fact returning more than the Clark originally was, one could say, to its
Well, it's an
level.
introduction of a completely new idea.
Right, right. I mean, because in fact the
original building has nothing in
nothing to
common.
do with the local tradition and all that. That's right.
The
That's right.
73 building
Right.
has nothing
Nothing-
to do with anything. And but it's a change. It represents a change in value, and it represents an articulation of ideas that wasn't theretofore deemed important. And
Right.
And so, in and by itself, it's possible to say that it's all contextual, but I actually believe it's conceptual rather than anything else.
And I think it also underscores the extent to which these things are irrelevant to architectural style, in fact, because this is very much not about that. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to go back to the materiality question that Kulapat you spoke to, and you brought up the idea of the wood and sort of the joinery and how you can notice that as you're sitting in these spaces year round. But that's something, as having grown up in New England, I would notice in a lot of homes. But what I think is unique about the museum is that you can also appreciate that in the concrete. You don't see that in a lot of homes or even businesses here. When you think about wood and concrete, you think about pouring a foundation for a home. But here, we have these beautiful columns with these edges that are just spectacular. These walls that stand monolithically to, represent, ways to direct views, but also ways to sort of define space. Can you speak to, and maybe Mr. Ando, you could also speak to that craftsmanship of the concrete. That's something, having had the opportunity to work alongside many of you for the last 2.5 years, and I bring people through the building, they notice the wood, they say, wow, that's really beautiful, but then they see the concrete, and they ask why. And I think that that's an important question.
矢野さんに答えてもらってほしいって言ってますよ。So Mr. Ando is asking Mr. Yano to answer that question.
Yano.
I can assure you, Yano knows the answer. The question is whether he's going to know the question.
This need not be an international diplomatic issue here. It's not about, it should just be about.
Maybe to give Yano-san a little time to think about this, just to the craftsmanship question, in addition to our working obviously with Mr. Ando and Yano-san and our team, David Adler, who was on site, working with local craftsmen, and also a specialty concrete expert, Reg Huff, who has worked with Mr. Ando and Yano-san on other buildings. The idea of achieving what's known as Ando concrete is something that really strove to bring the best out of everybody. And the fact that the local craftsmen could do this is quite extraordinary. I think it's a wonderful example. So with that, I'll turn it over to Yano.
But I would like to add to that there is real knowledge and expertise that sort of surpasses the mere vision. And having had the opportunity to have the definition of that, I think has really been inspiring to everybody.
Well, Maybe I to kind of add a little bit. I think speaking from someone that's worked with Ms. Ando for many, many years, I think from my way of looking, and he has spoken about this too, that the reason why he liked concrete is because it's the most simple material that you can ever make. You know, I think, but at the same time, it reflects human intention. If you do it well, you can turn something completely mundane and ordinary into something completely excellent. So in a way, it's a man-made material. And what you see in the craft of concrete is you see the intention. You see people that work on it. You see all the precision that need to go in there. And as you know, it looks simple, but it's actually not. And I think that it's a one-time deal. You know, you put the formwork, the rebar, and you have one shot at it, and that's it. So it's like running a symphony of people that have to go in together. And for that reason, I think Mr. Ando, you know, not that he doesn't like stone, he doesn't like wood, but I think that there's those materials that you can actually buy with money. You know, I'm put it blankly in a sense that if you have more money, you can buy more beautiful stone, you can buy more beautiful wood, but material like concrete is something that you can buy, but it's actually in the commitment and the intention that beyond money. And I think that's the part that really rings through to him. And I think that to be able to bring that with, and every time, you know, speaking also for Mr. Ando, he doesn't insist on repeating what he has done in Japan. He go to a given place like Williamstown or, you know, in France or Italy, work together with local team, just like all of us, get to an understanding, you know, cheerlead everyone to get excited about this process, and let's cook the best concrete we can ever do. So I think that's the process that always happens.
Mr. Yano, do you wish to add anything or not? Or is it, no.
今クラパッツさん言われましたけど、大体コンクリートっていうのはやっぱり一番、安藤の一番の目的は空間を表すっていうことなんで、それを表すのにコンクリートは一番的確な材料かなというのが一つと、クラパッツさん言ったように、どこにでもある材料でやっぱりどこにでもない空間を作りたいというのはいつも我々が目指しているところです。ここでもそれがうまくその全体のランドスケープと一緒になってうまく表現できてるかなというふうには思っています。ちょっとわかりませんけど。
As Mr. Kulapat mentioned, it's our purpose that the primary objective is to clarify that particular space. And we feel that the concrete is the best material to do that. And as Mr. Kulapat explained, it's our office's philosophy is to create a space that is unique. It's a single space in the world using a material that is mundane everywhere. This time, I think I hope we succeeded. We have to wait. We need time to really see if we succeeded or not. But combined with the landscape, I feel that the concrete really worked, and it fulfilled its mandate.
特にね、一つは本当にウィリアムズタウンのクラフトマンの人たち、コンクリートいろいろあるじゃない、石。
One thing I'd like to say is that there is the craftsmen of Williamstown, including concrete and stonework. They are wonderful. Excellent.
We are really past when we'd hoped to adjourn. We'll do one more just because this is interesting and everybody's staying lively. So if we can do it real quick. Yes, sir.
Eric, you're not the first one who's asked that question. The simple answer at this moment in time is they'd be thrilled. Could be a longer answer. I'll leave this with, because Paul likes to talk about private museums. We didn't do it today, but it's fine. He didn't put any restrictions in his will. He didn't really care about institutions. He only cared about his collection. He died a year after. There were no heirs. His wife died 4 years after. He left an endowment. It changed. It changed very quickly. And I think it's nice to say that he would be happy with all the changes. I don't know if he would be, but we're so fortunate that he left the collection. He left the core building, a wonderful place to be. He left an endowment. He didn't leave a lot of people watching over us afterwards, and it has evolved. And that's a legacy, curiously enough, that his brother, an equally great collector, much more institutionally committed, did not leave. And what's so ironic about the difference between Sterling and Stephen Clark, Stephen Clark, one of the first board chairs of MoMA, very involved in the Metropolitan Museum, the Addison Gallery, and other places, is largely forgotten in the history of those institutions. And his brother, who didn't care about institutions, now has one.
I think if we believe that he merely expressed the hope that the next generations would take good care of it, that hope has been fulfilled. And maybe not in precisely the way in which he envisioned it, but nevertheless, it's been taken very good care of. And I think that's really the point.
That's the important thing.
Thank you all very much for being here, and please join me. Thank you.